Business is request for bill introductions. Do we have any requests? I do have one. It is RS 0984, and this is a request for a resolution. It's a constitutional amendment that will impact valuations for residential property using an averaging system. It's very similar to what HCR 5025 was last year with a few changes, but that is the resolution. Are there any questions? Okay, without objection, the request is approved. Are there any further requests for bill introductions? Okay, seeing none. Committee yesterday announced that we should have minutes from the January 21st, 22nd, and 27th to review. Were there any changes to be made that anyone noticed on the minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve all three sets of minutes. Representative Hoheisel, second. Representative Helgerson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Along that lines, committee, you should have also received minutes for the 28th. I think Leah got those out this afternoon. If you'll review those, we will take action on those tomorrow. At this point, committee, we will go ahead and open up the hearing on House Bill 2005, and I will turn to the revisor's office for an overview on that bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2005 would establish the Veterans Valor Property Tax Relief Act. The bill would provide an income tax credit commencing in tax year 2025, an amount that equals 75% of the amount of property and ad valorem taxes actually and timely paid by a taxpayer who has been deemed to be totally disabled, permanently and totally disabled, or unemployable according to federal regulations. And if such taxes were paid upon real or personal property used for residential purposes of such taxpayer, that is the taxpayer's principal place of residence for the tax year in which the tax credit is claimed. This would be a refundable tax credit, which means that any amount above tax liability would be refunded to the taxpayer. The Veterans Valor Property Tax Relief Act would be a part of and supplemental to the homestead property tax refund, except that the income and appraised valuations limitations would not apply. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, are there any questions? Yes, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you say 100 totally disabled, does that mean 100% or does 90%? You know, it doesn't mean 100.
I'd probably defer to one of the individuals probably coming up later to get into how they're more knowledgeable of the disability ratings than I would be.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thank Representative, I think last year when we were looking through these bills, there's the percentage rating, but in addition to that, there's also the designation of totally and permanently disabled, which is another designation above and beyond that. So I'm sure the conferees would be happy to answer that question. Any further questions for the revisor? See none. Thank you, Adam. Next, we turn to Department of Revenue for a quick overview on the fiscal note, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. We are estimating that House Bill 2005 would decrease state general fund revenues by $11.4 million in fiscal year 26, $12.2 million in fiscal year 27, and $13 million in fiscal year 28. To get our estimate, we did review data based upon the disabled veterans information that we got from the Kansas Office of Veterans Services, which shows that there are approximately 8,700 veterans who are deemed permanently and totally disabled or unemployable in Kansas. We're estimating that approximately 4,000 of these vets would be able to qualify for this program based upon 75% homeowners, and then we took out those that we, percentage that were already participating in other homestead programs. We are also able to look at the property tax values by county. Last year, we did it with a statewide average, and this year we were able to go down to the county level. So that's how we came up with our estimates.
Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any questions on the fiscal note? Yes, Representative Wolf.
I think you answered this, but I want to make sure. So these numbers is total property tax, not just the state share? Like the county?
The residential property tax, yes.
It's all of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and this should be, this is the cost of the tax credit, which would be refunding the property tax. There shouldn't be any impact at the local level if I'm reading the bill correctly.
Correct.
Yes.
Sorry.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. We'll now open up the proponent section testimony and welcome first to committee, Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I'm Pat Proctor. I serve the people of Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth, and Kickapoo here in the House. So first answer the question from the representative from Pittsburgh. There are 3 categories of veterans that are going to be served by this bill should it be passed. The first is 100% disabled, which in CFR they call totally disabled. And then the second category is 100% permanent and total, which is a separate category. It's basically like your disability is so severe and it's never going to get better that they give you that permanent and total classification so they don't have to keep reevaluating you. And then the third is, and I'm going to screw this up, total disability due to individual unemployability, TDIU. And that's a special category of folks that don't have the 100% rating, but because of the type of disability that they have, they're not going to be able to work. So that, I hope that answers your question. The other conferees are probably going to talk to you much more eloquently than I can talk to you about the sacrifices that our veterans make to protect us. And so I'm going to reserve my testimony to talk to you about how this is going to help Kansas and how this is going to help your constituents and your districts. Because I recognize, Geary County has 16% veterans. Riley County and Leavenworth County have about 6 or 7% veterans, but most of the counties in the state have less than 1% of their residents who are veterans, disabled or otherwise. So how does this help your constituents in your district if you don't have those veterans in your county? 2 things that I would leave you with. The first thing is these folks get their health care through the Veterans Administration, but very few of those services that they receive in health care actually come from a VA hospital. The vast majority of the health care that they receive is on the economy, right? It's in civilian hospitals with civilian non-government health care providers. And so when I'm a disabled veteran. I don't qualify for this bill. I'm not that disabled, but I do get my health care through the VA. And when I had surgery on my hands, I didn't have surgery in the VA hospital. I had it at KU Med. And the Veterans Affairs Department wrote a check to the KU Medical Center or KU Med to pay for that surgery. So these veterans that receive their health care in our state, that those federal dollars are propping up our healthcare system, which is struggling right now. And this is a way that we can keep that money in our state. The second thing that I would say is this is a lot of money that right now is leaving our state. We heard in Veterans Caucus last year that veteran service officers identify every year $600 million in benefits for folks that are separating from the military in the state of Kansas. And the vast majority of those veterans pack up their families and their kids and they go to Texas, Florida, Nevada, Alaska because they have this benefit. They have no property tax for disabled veterans. And so the folks are voting with their pocketbook and they're leaving, and they're taking those veterans benefits that they would be spending in the state of Kansas, propping up our economy, they're taking them out of the state. And that number, 600 million, that's just for the VFW. I don't have a total number, but the VFW is only one of the veteran service organizations that help veterans do their VA claims. So it's probably as much as $1 billion if you add in the American Legion and the Office of Veteran Services, Kansas Office of Veteran Services. That's $1 billion leaving and going someplace else to be spent in other states. And then the final thing that I would say is that we've got about 80,000 jobs in this state that are just unfilled. There's not a human to put in that job. And meanwhile, in our state, every year, we separate 3,000 veterans, service members, from Fort Leavenworth, Fort Riley, and McConnell Air Force Base. And those folks, a lot of them have degrees, a lot of them have advanced degrees. They're married to spouses that are working age spouses, that a lot of them have degrees or advanced degrees. They've got kids that could be going to our colleges, going to our schools, and they're packing them up and they're moving them to Texas and Florida. So whether we understand it or not, we're in a competition for that talent. We are competing with all these other states to keep that talent in our state. And I'm going to do public math up here, but if we could hang on to all those veterans, it wouldn't take a lot of years to fill those 80,000 jobs, grow our economy, and grow our state. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stop and answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Do you have a 3:30 committee you need to attend?
I do not.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and take questions at the end if you don't mind.
Thank you,
sticking
Mr.
around.
Chairman.
Thank you. Next up, I'd like to welcome Mike Kelly. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to be back. I promise not to give any military history lectures like I did last year, unless you want to have one. I'm wearing my Air Force jacket today, which I got issued to me in the 1990s, and it was a morale thing that we wanted to connect the current Air Force, the 1990s Air Force, back to World War II, because this is the kind of jacket we wore in World War II. And of course, we know that fighting the Nazis and fighting the Bushido culture of Japan and the Axis was a huge undertaking, and there were huge sacrifices. And there's lots of cemeteries full of markers, and some of those sacrifices occurred during that war, and some folks were injured during the war and passed away later. We have about 180,000 veterans in Kansas right now. And this bill would help about 5% of them, which is fine. We've got to start somewhere. And this bill does give a good chunk of their property tax back. I'm going to argue to you that each one of those veterans that's 100% permanent and total or unemployable, that they gave it the office. Their office was a jungle, a cockpit, the deck of a submarine, but they gave it the office. And lots of people haven't served, didn't need to serve because we had volunteers that served. I'd also point out that until the early 1970s, on and off, there was a draft. So there were people that were compelled to serve under the color of law. And I think those folks gave it the office especially as well. I've talked to local officials about bills like, previous bills like this one, and they talk about burden shifting. Well, I would argue that the veterans have held up a lot of burden in history. I want to say one final thing about the fiscal note. I talked to Ms. Smith about this, so it's not going to surprise her. The VA has a great mortgage benefit for veterans. And so for all veterans, there's about a 75% homeownership rate. And that was the number, that 75% was cranked into the numbers that Ms. Smith's people put together to make the fiscal note. I'm not convinced that 100% disabled veterans have a 75% homeownership rate. I think the number is lower. I have looked, and I've looked hard. I have not found that demographic information to be able to give you a hard number on that. But I would be surprised if in 3 years, if this bill passes, that the receipts met the fiscal note. I think we would undershoot it a little bit, but I can't tell you how much that would be, and I wish I could give you a number. Sir, I'll hang around for any questions or take them right now.
Thank you for your testimony. I think we'll take questions at the end, please. Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Tom Hollis. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chair and state representatives of the great state of Kansas, I thank you for giving me this opportunity, and Nate Butler for contacting me. I had 30-plus years as a combat infantryman in the Army, deployed to war twice in combat. In the first year as a battalion commander, I lost 12 soldiers, 87 wounded. Since that time, those numbers that were KIA'd has more than quadrupled, and we've lost because of mental and emotional health. So I think I am qualified to talk about what our veterans go through. After I retired, I was the executive director of Society of 1st Infantry Division. It was founded by soldiers to take care of widowers in 1919 after World War I. About 10,000 members. It takes care of active duty as well as veterans throughout the country, but primarily at Fort Riley. So again, I feel like I'm qualified to talk about soldiers and that great quality of a patriot. I'm not sure why it's in question, why we want to take care of them, but I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about the second and third order of effect. You know, I'm a strategic study person out of Fort Leavenworth, and I kind of wanted to just illuminate some things that we might be missing. Maybe you're not, but I want to talk about a few things, just thoughts that I have. Well, in my hometown of Junction City, there's a Michelin ATV parts. It started a few years ago. It was a great success for our community. Had about 40 employees. Now it's growing to near 400. 70% are military veterans. When I talk to the owners and the managers of that, I say, why are you going after the military? And it's because those hardened values that they get, whether it be through education or skill sets that they only can acquire through our military. Another great program the DoD has is soldiers to teachers and soldiers to farmers and ranchers. We all know that our farmers and ranchers, the second and third generations aren't there. And through the DoD, they actually educate soldiers, will provide some coverage for them so they can cover down on a farmer, learn those skill sets, and then work some loans so that they can take over the farming equipment and those farms and ranchers to continue that great heritage in this state. Same thing with teachers. My wife's a school teacher, retiring this year. She was a third grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary. She is probably one of the reasons why that school won a blue ribbon. Only 252 schools in the nation were awarded the blue ribbon for quality of teaching. She's here because I'm here. If I wasn't here, she wouldn't be here. The tragedy, though, is they haven't hired a backfill yet. See, School District 475 is short teachers. They can't get teachers. Students come out of school don't want to be teachers. But we have a great program through DoD, Soldiers to Teachers. In the past 14 months, I've lost 14 family and friends, veterans, in Junction City. They left in part, pretty much solely, because of the benefits in our neighboring states. 5 or 6 of them still actually work in Kansas. In other words, their business is still here. They telecommute. They live in Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Arkansas. Every one of them I've talked to, and I miss them tremendously, the reason they left was because the benefits are offered in those states. Pat Proctor mentioned it. Don't be mistaken. The bar that measures a veteran-friendly state has moved. It's a competition. There's 20 states and the District of Columbia that currently have these benefits. 2 or 3 other states are now looking at that to grow and move in that direction. Don't be left behind. These veterans are something that you cannot get here. You know, I was afforded many of opportunities in the service besides going to all the schools, airborne, ranger, air assault. I was able to get 2 masters, one in strategic studies and one of urban development. I helped my community out, urban development, when they were developing things on Main Street. I volunteer at my church. I volunteer at things with the community. You know, if you survey and go to your communities and talk to those that are volunteering or volunteer services or nonprofits, I guarantee you a large percentage of those are military members or veterans. Do you want to lose them? Who's going to backfill them? Another great benefit, if you look strategically, is a lot of companies are given federal and state tax incentives to hire veterans and disabled veterans. If you continue to lose veterans at a high rate, those companies aren't going to be moving here. They'll be moving in other states where the veterans are going to. Now let's talk about the veterans and some of the benefits. Again, Pat Proctor talked about the VA. He sees the VA. I go to the VA. But the numbers are coming down. Junction City has opened their doors and tried to expand. They put a pause on it. Why is that? If the numbers keep going down, why would the VA build here? There's 1.4 million veterans in Texas. There's a greater need for veterans care there. So those doctors, those nurses, those administrators that work at the VA, that pay taxes, that go into houses to help in the community, are going to go where the VA is building and developing and increasing in size because of need. And you will lose them as well. When I was the executive director of the society for those 3 years, every month I'd go to Fort Riley for the retirement community. Typically, there'd be somewhere between 30 and 35 veterans that would retire. And on those retirement ceremonies, they would announce where those individuals are going, what are they doing, what business they're going to open up, so forth. It used to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 of those, about 30 to 35 people retiring at these ceremonies, would put roots in Kansas. In 2019, as I started going to them, the number went down to about 1 or 2. If you go there today, it's maybe not even that. Again, you're in a competition with your neighboring states. They're the ones that are drawing our veterans that we need. The veterans that have the experience, the education, the team building, the volunteerism that you just can't grow here. And it's a precious, precious commodity. Mr. Chairman, if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll take questions at the end, and thank you for powering through. Sometimes we have some interesting rallies going on, so little distractions, but good job getting through your testimony there. Next conferee, I'd like to welcome Vanessa Reed. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Dear Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to make supportive testimony for House Bill 2005. I am currently serving in my 4th year on the Leavenworth School Board, USD 453, as well as my 1st year on Leavenworth County Commission. We had our County Commission meeting today around lunchtime, and so I did try to send this to you in PDF. We do have a letter of support. I have a paper copy if you would like that. The rest of this is my personal testimony that was prior submitted. I am 6th generation Leavenworth County, and I believe that recognizing the sacrifices our veterans have paid to keep us a free nation should be met with this tax refund capability. Those who have sacrificed countless years, months, and days away from their families, missing birthdays, anniversaries, and graduations deserve for there to be a way for their sacrifice to allow them to live more comfortably in the state of Kansas. Far too many veterans separate from Kansas, especially in Leavenworth County. We need incentives that are statewide to drive them to live, work, and play locally here in the great sunflower state of Kansas once they separate from the military. I ask that you do what you personally can to ensure that this bill makes it through to reality for our veterans. Thank you.
Thank you. And that does conclude the list that I have, but I do want to ask, is there anyone else wishing to appear before the committee as a proponent? Okay, if not, I'd like to direct the committee's attention. We have multiple written proponent testimony. Do not have any neutral or opponent testimony. Is there anyone wishing to appear either neutral or as an opponent? I guess I should have went to questions before we go to the next section of testimony, but committee, are there any questions for any of the proponents on this bill? Yes, Representative Helger.
Representative Proctor. Without any question, there's a need to recognize and give additional benefits to these individuals that have served this country and have been disabled in some way or another. There's no question about that argument. The one question I have is the comparison on the economic development and economic benefit that these individuals have and would bring to Kansas or leave in Kansas versus retirees that normally are in Kansas, and when they retire, they may go to Florida or some other states. Do you have any comparisons that you can share?
Yeah, statistically, not, I can't really kind of compare output. What I would say is a lot of these veterans that we're talking about don't retire from the military. A lot of these veterans we're talking about, they do 4 years of service and then they go back to civilian life. And so that retiree community is usually a lot more affluent. They've been in the military for 20 plus years, and then they have more advanced degrees, probably more economic means. So I think that it would be a mistake to kind of, when you're looking at this bill and you're looking at this population, think of me or some other retiree. A lot of these disabled veterans did one tour. A lot of the Vietnam veterans were disabled by their service, and they did like 2 years, one of them in the worst place on earth, and now they're suffering with a lifetime of disability. So it's a very diverse group, and I think it'd be a mistake to kind of just have in your mind the picture of the retiree.
Okay, so, and I appreciate that. So it's more that there is a labor force that has other benefits that they'd bring to Kansas. Do you have anything written or any studies that have been done to compare this?
Yeah, I've got the raw numbers of how many are separated each year from here, which is 3,000 veterans. I don't have a breakdown exactly of what percentage of those would qualify for this benefit, but I would say it's probably about 5% of the total separating veterans, just based on the national percentage that qualify as 100% or more disabled. So you're looking at about 5% of that 3,000 every year that this incentive might incentivize to stay here.
And I appreciate the information. I was looking for something from the Department of Defense or something from a university that shows specifically that this population and these service individuals are moving to Texas or other states, and that they would bring an economic benefit to this Kansas in exchange for this. Because while I totally agree that they deserve this service, we should also keep in mind that the property taxes that are not being paid are being picked up by individuals that have the retirees in Kansas that never served or do not qualify, or individuals that are still working. So that's what I'm trying to balance out.
I do have that number, actually. The Military Times has done a study of top destinations for separating veterans, and we're in the bottom 15 states in the country. The top states, as I said before, are Texas, Florida, Nevada, and Alaska, and then Illinois is number 5. And the reason is because the benefits for disabled veterans, especially property tax exemption, is much, much higher in those states.
Thank you very much. If you could provide that study, I'd appreciate it.
I will.
Thank you.
I will.
Representative Butler.
Chair, this could be addressed to anyone that will provide testimony. So we're just talking about the economic impact that veteran brings to the state. Can you tell us what the economic impact is for the installations in the state? I want to get a significant solution, not like tunnel, and for the
Yeah, the number that I've heard is $6.5 billion in direct and indirect impact on the local economies from Fort Leavenworth, Fort Riley, and McConnell. Then this veteran population, $2.8 billion in disability benefits just for the ones that stay here. $2.8 billion that they're getting in a federal check of disability benefits that they then spend on everything that they need here in the state, and we get sales tax from that.
So my next question would be this. The way I understand it, depending on when they start looking at veteran favorability of states, they have a grading system, green, red, yellow, and maybe so they grade us on that. And when they start looking at base rate alignment, I know that Colonel Paulson just talked about this just a moment ago, so he may have something as well to share. I know that they look at those when they start looking at base rate alignment, and is there any?
Yeah, so my first thesis paper was BRAC, Base Realignment Closure, in '92 when the Army was, all the forces were downsizing. The Army went from 781,000 to 495,000, and so they were closing installations. My last job, I was director for School for Command Prep at Fort Leavenworth. It's a Chief of Staff of the Army's program to re-blue all battalion and brigade commanders that are going into command. And so with that, in my direct correlation with those in DC, some of the things that we're involved in was the continuation of BRAC. As you know, that's something that's always looked at. I will tell you, one of the criteria on BRAC for closing installations or modifying installations or growing installations is the benefits associated or benefits provided to veterans and military within that state and community. So it is a criteria on their list. I will be candid, and I'm a big proponent. I live outside the gates of Fort Riley, but I will tell you that it's towards the top of a list should there be a structure reduction in our military.
One of the teachers at Lincoln Elementary are going to be recognizing them in 2 weeks for the ribbon accomplishments. And your wife was complimentary. She's talked through my grandkids and they all excel.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Proctor, I think my questions are for you, and thank you for bringing this. I know you're a strong advocate for veterans, and I appreciate your work. So you made a couple of comments that made me have questions. One of them was that this bill wouldn't apply to you. Would this bill apply to any current legislators?
I don't know the disability rating of every legislator now, so I'm sorry. I don't know if it would or not.
Well, I asked that because I thought by virtue, and you went through the 3 categories, but I thought you were really trying to hone in on those that are more in the, you said the last category was not going to be able to work, and the 100% permanent and total group, I know they can't work. So, but it's an or statement, so it would play to the lowest of those groups, and I'm not sure what that gets me.
I was probably unclear in my testimony. So the only people in there that probably are just so disabled that they can't do any job are the TDIU, the totally disabled due to individual unemployability. I can't believe I got that acronym twice in a row. But the permanent and total, they do have disabilities that are not going to go away, but they may still be able to do a lot of things. I know a lot of 100% disabled that left the military and had whole second careers, in academia or in business. And then the 100% and the 100% permanent and total, both of those groups are probably still employable in some capacity. The 100% maybe a little bit more than the permanent total, depending on the disability. But a lot of the disability, the 100% disabled, it's post-traumatic stress disorder. It's not a physical disability. It's that they're coping with some of the kind of the invisible wounds of war.
Gotcha. So, okay, so there could be some in the legislature because we have some 100% disabled folks. And then also, as I looked at it compared to some other bills, I don't see anything there about honorably discharged or combat related. Is that considered?
So last year when we had a bill that made uniform across all of the statutes, the definition of a veteran, and one of the requirements is that you were discharged under honorable conditions. So that would apply to this bill as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Kessler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I like the bill. My name's on the top of that as well. I think it's a great idea, but I do kind of have a question about a part of it here. This thing is supplemental to the homestead property tax, but what was the reasoning behind taking out the income and the appraised valuation out of this?
So when we did this, we sent a very similar bill to the governor last year as part of a conference committee report for House Bill 2096, and there were two different veteran measures in that bill. The first measure was this one, the Veterans Valor Act. I have added 100% disabled to this because I want to get more of the employable veterans captured in this, but it was very similar except for that. There was another bill, it was a property tax freeze, and that did have an income and a house value limit. It was for 50% or greater disabled and for seniors who are 65 or older, and that one did have a cap in it. So we didn't remove the cap from this one. I've just only filed this bill that never had a cap in it.
I understand that, but I was just kind of going through the scenario of, I have a friend, his parents are kind of getting up to the age where they need to kind of help them out a little bit, but neither one of their houses are sufficient enough to combine their families. I mean, if he just simply had to put that house in his father's name, that is a 100% totally disabled vet.
Right.
He buys his new $4 million house. Does that count to this?
Yeah. You know, I mean, you're not going to stop all fraud. But so I guess that it would be possible that somebody could do that. But the way the bill is written, I would think that that veteran would have to live in that house in order for that house to qualify, because it's only your primary domicile that's your homestead that qualifies for this exemption. So I guess if somebody bought a $4 million house and moved their disabled veteran dad in, I guess that, and made him the owner on paper of it, I guess, yeah, that probably would qualify. But it has to be the house, the primary domicile for the disabled veteran.
Mr. Hollis, did you want to respond to that as well?
I could, just something. So, you know, if you want to bring these disabled veterans, the disability, a lot of it's physical, but these veterans have a lot of physical and educational and technical experiences. If you want them to come here, they want to work and they want to contribute, and then they start making an income, now we're going to tell them, well, you have too much income. So that's a piece that you don't want to cut that off. You're trying to attract these people here to be part of a growing economy for your state and contribute, open businesses, do things like that. The second thing I'd like to mention is, disabled veterans is not this growing amoeba. It's going to continue and you're going to get more and more unless you get more here. There's a direct correlation between combat and disabled veterans and to the propensity of how much disabled they are. When you're in combat 7 days a week, 24/7, carrying 80+ combat loads, getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep, it wears you. We train, but not train to that level. They go to the field for a couple of weeks or whatnot. So the idea that this could be something that's a growing group it's a false lead. Again, hope we don't go to anything and put any of our citizens in harm's way. But as it stands now, with both OIF and OEF and other things, and Land and Resolve that's still going on as we send soldiers to the Eastern European area, again, it's not a combat zone per se where they're doing that kind of work that I've seen with soldiers both in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, I just had a couple, and I'd open this up to anybody that wanted to answer, but we talked a little bit about the categories, the three separate kind of categories that are eligible for this. Is there any data out there to know precisely how many Kansas veterans would be in each of those categories?
I believe that I believe Mike Kelly could answer that better than me winging it up here. He's got the exact number.
Sir, the demographics of the disabled, I did a little demographic research last year. I took the national number of veterans and the national number of veterans in each category, and the population of Kansas is about 85/100% of the national population. So I did that math for each category. I got, for 100% disabled, I got about 10,800. Now, the number that Ms. Smith used, she got that from KOVS, and I've been in discussions with KOVS, and why is your number quite a bit lower? And they have about, they say they have a list, they have a roster of everybody. Okay, I haven't seen that, I don't have access to it, I'm a private citizen right now. They think there's around 6,000, 100% permanent in total. I don't have it broken out by IU. I don't have it broken out by, it is possible to get a temporary 100% rating. I use the example of people that have had heart surgery, and when they're in cardio rehab, they're considered 100% disabled temporarily. Once they get to some milestone and they can, walk 10 minutes on the treadmill or whatever it is, then the VA would take them off of that temporary rating. But one of the problems is the national demographic data is, a lot of the veteran demographic data is based on race and gender and other factors and not the disability factor. One last thing I'll say is the VA puts out a report every year, and for all the veteran benefits, for all the veterans in Kansas, and they give a dollar value. And they break it out by disability compensation, medical care, construction at VA facilities, and they haven't put the latest one out yet, so anything in that is over a year old. But when we get that, I'd be happy to provide you a copy, or any member of the legislature that would like a copy of that document, and we can get some more information on that. Sir, if I could respond to one other thing, the question about the character of discharge. Bill last year was passed was HB 2760. And there's 4 main categories of discharge: honorable, general under honorable conditions, other than honorable, and then bad conduct or dishonorable. The last 2 are not considered veterans in Kansas, the other than honorable or bad conduct discharges. The general under honorable conditions, I believe, would be eligible under this bill. I just read through it one more time. I didn't see anything that took that characterization of discharge out.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yes, sir.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, again, we did not have any neutral or opponent testimony, so this will conclude the hearing on House Bill 2005. We'll now turn to a hearing on House Bill 2163, and I'll turn first to the Revisor's Office for a summary of that bill, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2163 establishes the Preceptor Income Tax Incentive Act by establishing an income tax credit for nursing home administrators, registered nurses, and registered dietitians that serve as a community-based preceptor who provide personalized instruction, training, and supervision for students. The bill provides an income tax credit for a community-based faculty preceptor who mentor the students, and the credit would be equal $250 for each 40 hours spent precepting. A preceptor would be required to certify with the Director of Taxation the number of hours of instruction and the amount of the tax credit claimed each year. The preceptor shall also be required to certify that the preceptor did not receive payment during such tax year for the training of the student. The educational institution of the student shall provide an annual statement for each student verifying the number of preceptorship hours. The credit would be a non-refundable income tax credit and would not be allowed to be carried forward. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In trying to read this over, I'm not sure if I've had this narrow enough. Would this apply essentially to any registered nurse who precepts any student in the state? Or is it more narrow than that?
I mean, there are some, under the definitions, the student has to be participating in a post-secondary institution. So it'd be higher level student, in age-wise. So there are some additional requirements, and they'd have to go through the certification or with the Department of Revenue, and getting in the school. So there are a few additional requirements. It's not just kind of ad hoc.
Do we have any other preceptor type programs in statute that you know of at the moment?
Not that I know of. There was a bill last year introduced that was,
Yes.
I think, similar in nature to this bill, but for different
Yeah, I think it
types
was
of training.
different categories. Okay. Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you, Adam. We'll now turn to Department of Revenue for an overview on the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. To come up with our estimate, we did have to make some assumptions. We did get numbers of licensed registered nurses, and we found some data on dietitians, but we made the assumption that if 10% of the licensed individuals claimed the tax credits for 120 hours assisting with the clinical course, and 1/3 of those credits were allowed against the liability, then the estimated impact would be around $1.5 million per fiscal year. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, thanks again. We'll now open up our proponent testimony and welcome first to committee Jaron Caffrey. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Jaron Caffrey. I'm the Director of Workforce and Healthcare Policy at the Kansas Hospital Association, and we do rise in support of this legislation on behalf of our 121 community hospitals throughout the state. A little context, so if you're not familiar, potentially, preceptors, you can really think of them as mentors in a way. Preceptors are the folks when in this case, I'll use the example of a nursing student, you have a certain number of clinical rotations you need to complete your program based on Board of Nursing accreditation standards. And several states recently, in light of workforce challenges across the country, Kansas certainly being a state that has healthcare workforce challenges, folks are really leaning into the idea of how can we address one of the elements that is a factor of causing some of these challenges, and that's really related more so on the collegiate side of the imbalance of clinical sites. So colleges need clinical sites to be able to provide these experiences in hospitals, in long-term care, for their students so you can graduate. There are a lot of cases where colleges have to get a little flexible to be able to accommodate some of those sites because there's not always ample numbers of preceptors. That's for a variety of reasons, but one thing, especially since the pandemic, in Kansas being a state where we are aging, there's more patients coming into these care settings. Oftentimes they have higher acuities, so it can be harder for somebody to volunteer their time to say, yeah, let me have a student come with me for however many hours that might be. And so 8 other states across the country, including Missouri to our east, have passed preceptor tax incentives, tax credits, over the last 5 years in particular. And so this legislation specifically focusing on registered nurses, licensed nursing home administrators, registered dietitians, we believe is important to address a factor of really incentivizing preceptors so Kansas colleges can have experiences more widely available to ensure that their students in their schools of nursing, in this example, can go through their curriculum, get the training they need, and then graduate. And so that way colleges don't have to really grapple with the situations of, well, can we admit a certain number of students if we don't have the clinical sites available to accommodate? And so that's really the goal of this legislation. And so we believe that by passing this, we will help bring a better equilibrium to this piece of the workforce challenge, and therefore graduate more nurses, bring more licensed nursing home administrators, registered dietitians into Kansas, and then staying and working in Kansas, serving in Kansas, hopefully for years to come. Because we do know there's a lot of research that does show where you do your clinical rotations, you are much more likely to actually stay there and work there, not just right out of college, but really for the long term. And so for all of those reasons, we believe that this is an important piece of legislation. It's, again, one element of addressing challenges facing the healthcare workforce. And so would be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time. And again, encourage you when you work this bill that you would recommend it favorably for passage. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, I think we'll go ahead and take questions. If you want to stay up, we'll take questions now if there are any. Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My wife's a nurse, so I understand kind of the nursing side of precepting a little bit. Can you understand, or can you explain a little bit more about the inclusion of nursing home administrators? You know, I get the impression that administrators don't do as much bedside as nurses.
Chairman, if it's all right, I might ask my colleague Kylie Childs from Leading Age to come up and specifically weigh in on that point.
Yeah, she'll be the next conferee, so might hold that question in reserve. Good question. Are there any further questions for this conferee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next, we'd like to welcome up Kylie Childs with Leading Age Kansas. If you want to, you could address the question first, or if you want to wait till the end, that's up to you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. My name is Kylie Childs, Director of Government Affairs with Leading Age Kansas. And to address your question, we included licensed nursing home administrators in this because we have a shortage of nursing home administrators. Part of the requirement for them to become licensed in the state of Kansas is to go through an administrator in training program, which does require a preceptor. And so the idea behind this is to include administrators and give them some incentive to take on new administrators so we can continue having an ample amount to support our assisted living and adult care home community. Yep. All right. If there's no other questions, I'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. My name is Kylie Childs. I'm the Director of Government Affairs with Leading Age Kansas, which is the state trade association of nonprofit and other mission-driven aging services providers. We have about over 150 members in our membership. And thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on HB 2163. I believe you have copies of my testimony, so I wanted to give you guys some background on the current landscape of aging services in Kansas. Some quick statistics from our 2024 situation report is, as an American turning 65 today, they have a nearly 70% chance of needing long-term care services or support. By 2036, the 65-plus population in Kansas will grow by 208,000, and by 2064, the 85-plus population is expected to grow by 260%. So despite the ever-growing need due to our aging population, aging services providers have experienced hardships resulting in closures, thereby limiting access to care for our seniors across the state. Since 2020, there have been at least 57 facilities who have taken beds offline or closed their doors completely. There's nearly 89,000 Kansans living in an area with only one nursing or residential care provider within a 30-minute drive, and there's already 32,000 living in an area with no provider, so we call those care deserts. These care deserts are often doubling their drive time to reach a provider and limiting access to friends, family, loved ones, and access to care. So one of the biggest challenges to sustaining services has been financial and our workforce pipeline. Since 2020, overall employment in Kansas has grown by 4%, yet aging services employment has declined by 1%. Turnover rates remain high as we attempt to recover from those who left during the pandemic due to burnout. And according to the Board of Nursing in 2023, nearly half of the registered nurses in Kansas were 50 and older and nearing retirement. So for these reasons, Leading Age Kansas has been working with our providers and others to identify policy solutions with low financial impact that address the bottlenecks in our workforce pipeline. So we believe a preceptor income tax incentive is one of those key pieces to this puzzle. We believe by rewarding experienced professionals for mentoring and training new healthcare workers, we can expand the pipeline by increasing hands-on training opportunities. improve retention by fostering career development and mentorship, and enhance quality care by ensuring new hires receive strong real-world experience. I do believe in written testimony you will have received a proposed amendment from our counterparts at the Kansas Healthcare Association, and this would be to include preceptors for educational sponsors outside academic institutions, and that is specifically for that nursing home administrator piece, because they use sponsor programs such as the Kansas Adult Care Executives Sponsorship Program Administrator in Training. So this would be a minimal increase to the fiscal note, and we do view it as a friendly amendment. And for all these reasons, we would ask you to support the passage of HB 2163, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Sanders and then Corbett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you said in response to the question that you were first addressing that there's a shortage of nursing home administrators. Is there not also a shortage of registered nurses? And if so, how serious is that?
There is a shortage of registered nurses, specifically for our nursing homes. We started doing research when the federal minimum staffing rule came down and started looking at if we needed 24/7 RN coverage, if we needed to have a certain amount of per patient per day, how short would we be? And with our nursing homes, only about 70% of our nonprofit providers would be able to meet that. So then when you're looking at the greater landscape of the healthcare continuum, we're traditionally in competition with our hospitals who are also needing registered nurses, as well as our state hospitals who are looking for registered nurses as well. And then we are also struggling with registered dietitians.
So would this bill carve out a situation where it would be more financially advantageous for registered nurses to come to work at nursing homes?
Would it carve out?
Or make it reasonable, or make it a thing, for lack of a better term, that registered nurses would consider that it would be in their financial interest to come to work at a nursing home?
We believe this is one piece of it. We believe there has to be multi-steps in our plan, and that's why we have been working on several pieces of legislation, but we do believe this will be one thing that can help with incentivizing them to come work at a nursing home, as well as stay there and bring in the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of years ago, when the nurses were given an option to be vaccinated or take a walk, I attended several of these meetings here in Topeka with lots of nurses, some with 20, 25 years were just let go. Did any of these people ever come back, or would they be qualified for any of these programs now if we could get them back into
Yes,
game?
and there have been efforts by our nursing homes to reach back out to people who left during the pandemic, as well as those who retired and took early retirements. We've been able to bring some of them back into the workforce, but we believe this would just be another incentive to start having those conversations again. Mm-hmm.
Representative Stogstill and then Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of these nursing homes and assisted living homes are for-profit institutions, as well as some nonprofits as well. My question is, we've been looking at trying to get some financials to see about some of these for-profit nursing homes and assisted living homes, which are spread across Kansas and are owned by like hedge funds in New York and other entities and so on. We're having a heck of a time getting any information on their financials. And I would be very uncomfortable voting for this until we were more aware of the financial situations of those particular companies, where that money is being spent in Kansas, and how much of it is leaving and going out of state.
Okay. So there are cost reporting requirements for nursing homes in the state of Kansas, and all of those cost reports are available through KDADS. To speak to ownership and things like that, CMS did require some more ownership details to be listed whenever they are filling out their cost report forms and who all is involved with that. So not only will you be able to see who the administrator is and who owns the building, but you'll also be able to see if anybody has any great financial interest in that nursing home.
Okay. Well, we just seem to be having difficulties in accessing that information, so I guess we'll keep looking.
Yes, I can try and look on CMS and provide you some additional information as well.
Great, that'd be good. Thank you.
Representative Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a very interesting concept to me. I'm not familiar with the healthcare industry and nursing homes or anything like that, but the tax credit, is it limited in any way? I know you cannot be compensated, so it's limited by that. So it's strictly a volunteer basis. How many tax credits can they get in a year? Like one a month if they do 40 hours?
Correct. It would be dependent upon how many successful hours they complete with that student. So however many clinical hours are required for that student, they'd be able to claim them in 40-hour chunks.
And it would be limited by the amount of tax that they...
Correct. It's non-refundable. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Is that something, a report that they would, I don't mean to jump in the queue, Representative Alcala, you were next, but just to piggyback off of that, the bill states that they have to certify to the Director of Taxation. Is that a report that is audited at all, or is that just something the director would have to take it and say, okay, you've got 200 hours last year, so this is the tax credits that you were eligible for?
Correct. It's something that would come in partnership with the colleges. The colleges would provide that certification as documentation, but there is not an audit piece that we have in here currently.
Okay. Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to leave my colleague out here, the representative, but I agree with him. I would lean on the negative side of this because of the information or lack of information. But if it's that easy to access, and I haven't been on my S drive, so it may be there, but if you could put something together and send to this committee, because I've had no luck trying to find anything. And so the for-profit, the hedge fund issue, who owns what, that raises serious flags with me.
Yes, we can reach out and try and get you something.
Because I'm not there yet.
Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony, Kylie. Next, I'd like to welcome Heather Morgan with the Kansas Association of Community Colleges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have my written testimony. We are the colleges who are training most of the LPNs and RNs across the state. There's a tremendous nursing shortage, and some of that shortage is related to our inability to fully get up to our nursing caps because we can't find clinical locations and preceptors to work with our students. So in some parts of the state, it's not a matter of not having the faculty or not having the facilities, it's a matter of not having the clinical locations and the preceptors to supervise those students. And so we've been working with the Kansas Hospital Association and other healthcare associations, the Behavioral Health Center of Excellence in Wichita, to try to figure out how to tackle this. And this is just one tool in the toolbox. I'm happy to answer any questions. We do pay a number of preceptors because it's hard to find volunteers. So they would obviously not be eligible for this bill. There would be a little bit of administrative work on the college's perspective, but we have to do a lot of administrative work with our nursing programs to certify a lot of things. So this is just an idea for a tool in our toolbox. And like I said, anything that we can do to try to solve this healthcare workforce problem, the community colleges stand ready. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather, I did have a quick question for you, and some other committee members might as well, but you hit on exactly before I even asked the question, you said you pay a lot of these preceptors. So how, in your estimation, how many volunteers would actually be out there that might even qualify for this program?
So this is like a one-on-one thing. When I talk to our nursing faculty, this is the #1 challenge that we have is finding people. So it's a matter of sometimes there's a reason that they don't want to be paid. And so this might be an opportunity for them. I don't think it's going to be the overwhelming majority. I think most people are going to take our small pittance that we can pay them for their very hard work with our students and not do this. But if this is another tool in the toolbox that opens up some more preceptor and clinical locations, we're all for that.
Okay, thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Representative Awerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What's the going rate? What do they charge? What's a preceptor charge for a 40-hour week?
I knew you were going to ask me, and I'm not sure I would have to get that back to the committee, but I can tell you that it varies across the state and it varies by setting. Our students have to get clinical experiences in pediatrics and long-term care and all sorts of different settings, so it varies a lot. But I can get that back to you, the exact number.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is a registered nurse a registered nurse a registered nurse, or are there registered nurses that have specific training to go to a hospital versus go to a long care facility or do the myriad of other things nurses might do?
If you pass the NCLEX, you're a registered nurse. You can be a bachelor's degree registered nurse, a BSN. We have ADN to BSN programs where a student can study with us at the community college and come out with a bachelor's degree in nursing through partnerships with the, KU and Ottawa University as well. So in addition, that nurse might say, I want a psychiatric specialty, and they may take more psychiatric classes. So it's really up to the nurse. But the NCLEX, if you pass the NCLEX, which is a national test, you're a registered nurse. And then it's be up to the registered nurse to get additional education in different specialties.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions, committee? Representative Shu and then Avercamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heather, I'm not sure if this is for you. It might be Revisor, it might be somebody else, but I'm just trying to wrap around my mind around how this works, possibly that Kansas is a compact state. I don't know if this affects this bill at all. It seems like they would have to at least work in Kansas to get a Kansas income tax credit, and then the student would need to be a Kansas student, but theoretically they could be a Missouri resident and claim this, right? If they're working in a Kansas hospital.
I don't see anything in the bill that would stop someone who lives in Missouri, works at a Kansas hospital, but I don't know if this is if they would have Kansas income tax liability. I know it sounds crazy, but we often run into this issue when our students are doing preceptor and clinical rotations in other parts of the other states. Representative Smith's area, they're often not in Kansas. They're going to Colorado or Nebraska to do clinicals, and that's a whole nother set of challenges.
I'm not opposed to that idea, but just, yeah, we might be giving this to out-of-staters.
I'll go to Representative Avercamp first and then Howerton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, if this might be better for research, more of a general question, and if it's not the right time, I'll stop. But looking at these fiscal notes and looking at the potential impact, you know, this one is nearly $110,000 for the state general fund just for the Department of Revenue to implement. We're looking at a $1.5 million. Yeah. How does the budget process work with the appropriations and the runs? So when we take a look at what our carryover balance is going to be in 2029, and let's say this policy passes through the process, we don't know how much it's going to be used. How does the budget process work with regards to the $1.5 million projection on the fiscal note?
Yeah, Eddie, if you want to respond to that.
So the state's revenue estimates are updated twice a year, once in the fall and then once in mid-April. And at that time of the April estimates, we incorporate any legislation that has been enacted in law up to that point into those estimates. And so oftentimes something that is less than $5 million, it might just get captured in the sense of, do we round up or round down? Because of course, typically when we estimate individual income tax and all of the large taxes, we typically estimate those to the nearest $5 or $10 million, something like that. But if it's enacted into law by whatever our CRE day is in the spring, which this year is going to be April 17th, the statute provides for it to be as late as April 20th, we incorporate at that time. Anything that is enacted into law after that point in time, we actually publish almost immediately after legislative sine die, a legislative adjustments memo, and we actually adjust the estimates according to the amounts specified in the bills. And so we would, at that point in time, incorporate the estimates, the fiscal impact of if this bill were to be enacted in law after April 17th. And by enacted, I actually mean receive either a governor's signature or a veto override vote. And we would reduce those April 17th estimates by the amount of that further enacted legislation. And then that is what kind of flows into the profile as it relates to our expectations that final amount from the legislative adjustments memo is what we incorporate as our expected revenues going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's every year thereafter, correct?
Yeah, if the fiscal impact of a piece of legislation is relatively steady year to year, we just kind of roll it into the base and we have it grow or diminish in accordance with kind of the underlying receipts. But if it is a policy that has a markedly different fiscal impact from one year to the next, the sort of thing where it's going to be $10 million in year one, $50 million in year two, $100 million in year three, we make explicit adjustments to our expectations for those pieces of legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think that's a good question because a lot of times we're working on the tax side here and we don't maybe think about how that flows through to the appropriations and the budget. So that was a good question. Representative Howerton, did you have something to add on that previous question?
I did, Mr. Chair. So if we were concerned about only residents of Kansas, we could make an amendment, I believe, to make it a resident-only filing where they would be able to access that credit.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Committee, any further questions for Ms. Morgan? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. That is all of the proponents I have appearing before the committee. Did I miss anyone? Is there anyone wishing to appear as a proponent? If not, I'll draw the committee's attention to the written only testimony. I do not show any neutral or opponent testimony. Is there anyone wishing to appear either neutral or as an opponent? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2163. Committee, one item of business before we adjourn. I have appointed the following members to the I don't know if we want to name our subcommittee the sales tax or tax credit subcommittee, but we'll be appointing Representative Henry Helgerson as chair, Representative Rishu, Representative Hoheisel, Representative Essex, Representative Howerton, Representative Corbett, Representative Kessler, Representative Wolf, Representative Awerkamp, and Representative Turner. And I might turn it over to Representative Helgerson for the committee announcement.
The Department of Revenue and Legislative Research have agreed to provide some briefing materials to us. This is not a new topic. This is a topic that's been studied before, so it would be helpful to look back and see where the legislature has looked previously. All of us have conflicts during the day with committee meetings, so we're going to meet at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm kidding. But the reality is we all have conflicts. We all have noon meetings. So the first meeting, and we'll talk a little bit about it, is going to be tomorrow right after tax. And we'll get some briefing materials. I'll try to get it moved quickly. And I'll even bring some treats to wake everybody up so we go through that and then decide where we're going to go after that. Any questions?
Hearing the treats, are you open for more committee members if they want to?
We're always willing to have additional members join us.
Yes, committee, any questions on the subcommittee assignment? I'll do my best to get us out of here in a timely fashion tomorrow, so you have a good amount of time to dive into that. But with that being said, that is all we have for today, and we are adjourned.